"Don't serve him," the manager snapped. "He's bad for the image." The old man sat alone in the corner booth coat, frayed hands folded quietly beside a single glass of water. Every waiter walked past him like he was invisible. Except Laya. She stepped forward anyway. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, placing the menu in front of him. Across the room, the manager watched with cold amusement. One wrong move and she'd lose the job her family depended on. What he didn't know, the silent man in that shabby coat wasn't a problem customer. He was the owner of the entire restaurant, and tonight he was deciding who truly belonged there. The Gilded Spoon wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater located in the heart of downtown Chicago. It prided itself on its Michelin star aspirations, its clientele of stockbrokers and socialites, and its ruthlessly enforced aesthetic. Every plate was a masterpiece, every server a polished actor, and every guest a potential critic. For Laya Reed, it was the place where her dreams went to wait. By day, she was a nursing student, buried in textbooks about anatomy and patient care. By night, she tied on the crisp black apron of the Gilded Spoon and transformed. The money was essential. Her mother, Elena, was locked in a quiet losing battle with multiple sclerosis, and the mounting medical bills were a constant suffocating weight. Her younger brother Leo, just 17, was watching their mother fade, and their savings evaporate with a fear in his eyes that Laya was desperate to erase. This job, with its potential for hefty tips from the city's elite, was their lifeline. And then there was the man in booth 4. He wasn't a stockbroker or a socialite. He was invisible. He started appearing on a Tuesday. He chose the most secluded booth in the back near the service entrance, a spot usually reserved for staff breaks or last resort seating. He was probably in his late 70s, with a face etched with the kind of deep lines that spoke of a long, hard life. His clothes were clean, but hopelessly dated and worn. A faded corduroy jacket with patched elbows, trousers that had been pressed one too many times, and scuffed leather shoes that had seen better decades. He never made a fuss, never called for attention. He would just sit a stoic statue of a man waiting patiently, and the staff let him wait. "Don't make eye contact, Jessica Davis." A senior waitress with a tongue as sharp as her stilettos had hissed at Laya on his first day. "He's probably a nutcase. Gerald will have a fit if he scares off the Davenports in booth 6. Gerald Price was the restaurant manager, a man whose smile never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He worshipped profit margins and the restaurant's pristine image. Anything that threatened either was swiftly and mercilessly eliminated. An old man who looked like he'd wandered in from a different era was a definite threat. For 2 days, the man sat for nearly an hour before leaving unnoticed and unserved. On the 3rd day, Laya couldn't bear it. She watched as Jessica and another waiter, Kevin, played a silent game of rock, paper, scissors to see who wouldn't have to walk past his booth. Gerald was busy fing over a food blogger at the front of the house. Laya took a deep breath, grabbed a menu and a glass of water, and walked over. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice soft. The man looked up, and for the first time she saw his eyes. They were a startlingly clear blue, sharp and intelligent, a stark contrast to his shabby exterior. They widened slightly in surprise, as if he'd forgotten he was visible to others. "Good evening," he replied, his voice raspy from disuse, but with a low, cultured timbre. She placed the water and menu on the table. "Sorry for your wait. What can I get for you?" He looked down at the menu, a document filled with deconstructed entree and foam-topped appetizers, with a faint, almost sad smile. "I'm not terribly hungry. Just a black coffee, please, and perhaps a bowl of your tomato soup." It was the cheapest thing on the menu aside from a side of bread. "Of course," Laya said, smiling warmly. "I'll put that right in for you." When she turned back to the service station, Jessica was leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "What are you doing? Gerald's going to skin you alive. Table 4 is a black hole for tips." "He's a paying customer," Jessica Laya said, punching the order into the terminal. "He's a liability," Jessica sneered. "He looks homeless. People come here to feel rich and successful, not to be reminded of that." Laya ignored her, and went to the kitchen. Sal Moretti, the head chef, a burly man with a permanent scowl and a heart of gold, looked at the ticket. Tomato soup for booth 4. He grunted, his thick eyebrows raised. That old fella finally gets someone to serve him. He seems perfectly nice, S. Liar said, grabbing a polished spoon. S. ladled the vibrant red soup into a bowl. Kid, you got a good heart. Don't let this place beat it out of you. And don't let Price see you being nice to that guy. The man's got the soul of a cash register. Liar brought the soup and coffee to the man. He thanked her quietly and ate with a slow, deliberate grace that seemed at odds with his appearance. He didn't read a book or look at a phone. He just ate occasionally, looking around the restaurant with an unreadable expression. When he was done, he left a $5 bill on the table for a $7 order. Jessica saw it and laughed. So you actually lost money serving him? Smart move, genius. Liar just pocketed the bill, feeling a strange pang of defensiveness for the old man. He came back the next night and the night after that. He always sat in booth 4, always ordered the tomato soup and black coffee, and always left just enough to almost cover the bill. And every night served him. She began to look forward to it. A small moment of genuine, uncomplicated human connection in a shift filled with fake smiles and demanding hutrons. She learned his name was Arthur. He never offered a last name and she never asked. How are your studies, Liar? He asked one evening, about 2 weeks into their routine. Liar was startled. How did you know my name or that I'm studying? Her name tag was small, but he must have noticed it. A small smile touched his lips. I'm observant. And you have the look of someone with their mind on other, more important things. You're not a lifer here. Is it that obvious? She laughed a little self-consciously. I'm studying to be a nurse. A noble profession, he said, stirring his coffee. It requires patience and empathy. He looked at her pointedly. You seem to have both in abundance. That compliment coming from this quiet, forgotten man meant more to her than any $100 tip she'd ever received. But their little ritual had not gone unnoticed. One Friday night, the restaurant was packed. Liar was rushing between a table of 6, demanding another round of cocktails, and a couple celebrating an anniversary. As she passed booth 4 with a tray of fresh bread, Gerald Price stepped directly into her path, his body rigid with anger. Miss Reed, my office now, he said in a low, furious hiss. Ella's heart sank. She handed the tray to another waiter and followed him to the cramped windowless office at the back. Gerald shut the door in his face, a mask of contempt. What exactly do you think you're doing? He began, his voice dangerously calm. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Price. Don't play dumb with me, he snapped. I'm talking about your pet project in booth 4. I have told my staff repeatedly that we are to cultivate an atmosphere of exclusivity, of success. That man, he gestured vaguely towards the restaurant, is an eyesore. He comes in orders, the cheapest thing on the menu occupies a 4-person booth for an hour and a half and barely pays his bill. He is a cancer on my floor. He's a person, Mr. Price. He's always polite. He never causes any trouble. His very presence is trouble. Gerald's voice rose. Our average check per person is $150. His is $7. He is costing us money. He's lowering the tone, and you are encouraging him. The other staff know to ignore him until he gets the hint and leaves. You, on the other hand, treat him like he's royalty. Liar stood her ground, her hands clenched into fists at her side. I'm treating him like a human being. It's called hospitality. I thought that was our business. Gerald laughed a short, ugly sound. Our business is making money, Ms. Reed. Don't ever forget that. This is your one and only warning. Stop serving him. Let him sit. He'll get tired of it and find some other place to haunt. Am I clear? The threat was unspoken, but hung heavy in the air, or you'll be the one looking for another place. Liar thought of her mother's medication of Leo's worried face. Fear coiled in her stomach. Yes, Mr. Price. She whispered the words, tasting like ash in her mouth, crystal clear. She walked out of the office, her face pale. She could feel Arthur's gaze on her as she passed his booth, but she couldn't bring herself to look at him. She felt like she had betrayed him and herself. For the rest of the night, she avoided the back of the restaurant, her heart a lean weight in her chest. When she finally dared to glance at Booth 4 an hour later, it was empty. On the table next to his usual $5 bill was another folded neatly beside it. A 20 enough to cover his bill and leave her a generous tip. It was the most he had ever left. It felt less like a reward and more like a test, or perhaps a goodbye. The next day, Laya arrived at work with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She'd spent the night wrestling with her conscience. The $20 bill sat on her dresser at home, a violent accusation. It was more than just money. It was a gesture of appreciation she felt she no longer deserved. Gerald's threat echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of how precarious her situation was. One wrong move, and her family's lifeline would be cut. She scanned the restaurant as she clocked in. Booth 4 was empty. A wave of something she couldn't quite name relief, mixed with disappointment, washed over her. Maybe it was for the best. Maybe Arthur had understood her silence and moved on. It would make her life easier, safer. But just as she was setting a table, the small bell above the front door chimed. Laya looked up. There he was, Arthur. In his same worn coat with the same quiet dignity, he walked past the hostess stand and made his way to his usual spot in booth 4. He sat down and waited, his clear blue eyes surveying the room, eventually landing on her. Jessica, who was polishing glasses behind the bar, caught Ila's eye and gave her a sharp warning shake of her head. Gerald was in his office, but he had eyes and ears everywhere. Laya's heart pounded. She could follow orders. She could walk past him, ignore the silent plea for a simple cup of coffee, and keep her job. She could protect her family. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. But then she saw him not as a problem, but as a person, a lonely old man who, for whatever reason, had chosen this place as his small sanctuary. She thought of her nursing textbooks, of the lessons on patient dignity and compassionate care. Was this any different, denying a person basic decency for the sake of appearances? To hell with it, she thought. Her hands trembling slightly, she poured a glass of water, grabbed a menu she knew he wouldn't need, and walked the long, nerve-wracking path to booth 4. "Good evening, Arthur," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He looked up at her, and the faintest hint of a smile warmed his tired face. It was a smile of relief, of gratitude. "Good evening, Laya. I was hoping I'd see you." "The usual?" she asked, a silent pact passing between them. "Please," he said. As she walked back to the kitchen, she could feel Jessica's glare burning into her back. The act of defiance was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. She had crossed a line. The week that followed was a quiet war of attrition. Laya continued to serve Arthur every night. He never mentioned the $20 bill, and she never mentioned Gerald's warning. Their conversations became a little longer, a little more personal. He asked about her specific nursing courses, showing a surprising knowledge of cardiac care. She learned he had a fondness for classical music, particularly Bach, and that he believed the secret to a good life was a strong cup of coffee and an honest day's work. Meanwhile, Gerald's hostility grew from a simmer to a boil. He didn't confront her directly again, but his displeasure manifested in 1,000 petty ways. He started assigning her the most difficult sections, the ones with notoriously demanding or stingy customers. He criticized her for tiny imagined infractions. A fork that wasn't perfectly aligned. A water glass filled a centimeter too low. He would stand near Booth. 4 arms crossed his presence. A silent, menacing reprimand. Jessica, emboldened by Gerald's attitude, became more openly cruel. She would accidentally bump into Laya, making her spill drinks. She'd snatch the last clean apron or hide the polish for the silverware. She spread rumors among the staff that Laya was a suck-up, that she was probably getting something out of the old man. "Maybe he's her sugar grandpa," she'd say with a loud, vicious laugh. Though by the looks of him, he can only afford the sugar packet, not the whole bowl. Laya did her best to ignore it, focusing on the image of her mother's smile and the quiet approval in Arthur's eyes, but the pressure was immense. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. The restaurant was unusually slow, the mood as dreary as the weather outside. Laya's day had been particularly hard. She'd received a call from her mother's physical therapist. Elela Naina's condition had worsened slightly, and they recommended a new expensive piece of equipment for their home. The cost was staggering, another mountain of debt to add to the pile. She was on edge, her mind a whirlwind of financial calculations and worry. She was carrying a tin of hot lobster bisque to a table of wealthy tourists when Jessica, coming around a corner far too quickly, collided with her. The tin flew from Isla's hands. Hot, creamy soup splashed across the silk blouse of the woman at the table, who shrieked in shock and anger. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Elela gasped, rushing forward with napkins. "Watch where you're going. Clumsy." Jessica snapped, making it sound entirely like Laya's fault, before breezing past. The woman's husband was on his feet, his face puce. "This isn't outrageous. This blouse is Chanel. Do you know how much this costs?" Gerald was at the table in an instant, his face a mask of mortified apology. He bowed and scraped, promising to cover the dry cleaning, comping their entire meal, offering them champagne. His charm was slick and professional, but when he turned his eyes to Laya, they were filled with ice. "Read my office." Now the walk was the longest of her life. The tourists, angry, muttering, followed her. She saw Arthur in booth 4, watching the entire scene, his expression grim. The moment the office door closed, Gerald's facade crumbled. "Are you an idiot?" he roared, his voice shaking with fury. "Or are you actively trying to get fired?" "That was Mr. Henderson from Henderson Capital. He's one of our biggest clients." "It was an accident," Laya whispered, her voice trembling. "Jessica bumped into me. I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses." He cut her off. "I saw you. You weren't paying attention. You were probably daydreaming about your charity case in the corner booth. I warned you, Ms. Reed. I warned you about becoming distracted. This is the final straw." He leaned across the desk, his face inches from hers. "You are on probation. One more mistake. One fork out of place. One drop of water spilled. One more minute wasted on that worthless old man. And you are gone. And I will make sure your record is so tarnished you won't be able to get a job waiting tables at a greasy spoon diner. Do you understand me?" Tears welled in Laya's eyes, hot with humiliation and fear. All she could do was nod. "Get out and clean up your mess." She fled the office, her cheeks burning. She spent the next 10 minutes profusely apologizing to the Hendersons, who treated her with icy disdain. When she finally returned to the service station, her composure shattered. S caught her arm. "Hey," he said gruffly. "I saw what happened. The Viper tripped you." "It doesn't matter, S. He's going to fire me, that rat," S muttered, turning back to his grill with a violent chop of his knife. "Don't worry, kid. Just lay low." Laying low meant avoiding booth 4. The rest of the night, she forced another waiter, a nervous young man named Ben, to take Arthur his coffee and soup. She couldn't risk it. She could feel Arthur's eyes on her, questioning. But she didn't look back. It felt like a physical pain, a betrayal of their unspoken alliance. When closing time finally came, Laya was wiping down her last table, her body aching with exhaustion and her mind numb with dread. Arthur was long gone. As she gathered her belongings from her locker, she found a small folded napkin tucked into the vents. She opened it. Inside was a simple hand-drawn sketch of a canary perched on a branch. It was surprisingly detailed, beautifully rendered. Below it, in a neat, elegant script, were 3 words. "Courage, little bird." A single tear traced a path down her cheek. He had seen everything. He understood, and he hadn't given up on her. The small drawing was a lifeline, a tiny spark of defiance in the oppressive darkness of her fear. She didn't know how, but she knew she couldn't give up on him either. She folded the napkin carefully and put it in her wallet, a secret talisman against the storm she knew was coming. The drawing of the canary became Laya's secret talisman. Tucked carefully into a worn sleeve of her wallet, the folded napkin was a tangible piece of courage she could touch whenever the oppressive atmosphere of the gilded spoon threatened to suffocate her. During the day, She'd look at it before heading into a grueling clinical session at the nursing college, a reminder of the quiet dignity she was fighting for, both for her future patients and for herself. At night, it was her shield. A single press of her hand against her apron pocket was enough to feel its presence, a silent pact with the man in booth 4. Courage, little bird. She continued to serve Arthur, but their interactions transformed into a covert ballet of risk and trust. It was a dangerous game played in plain sight. Lyra became a student of Gerald Price's movements, learning the rhythm of his patrols across the dining room floor. She knew when he was most likely to be fing over a wealthy regular at the front, or when he'd retreat to his office to pore over spreadsheets with a pained expression. These were her windows of opportunity. She would approach booth 4 with a brisk professional efficiency that belied the warmth in her eyes, taking Arthur's simple order, always the soup, always the coffee, with a low voice and a quick nod. He in turn understood the game, keeping his replies brief and his gaze steady. It was a conspiracy of kindness, a tiny rebellion conducted over a $7 check. But while Lyra navigated the treacherous currents of the restaurant, the storm in her personal life was gathering force. The breaking point arrived not with a bang, but with the cold, clinical tone of a phone call. She took it during her 10-minute break, huddled in the cramped, metallic-smelling staff locker room. It was her mother's insurance case manager, M. Reed. The voice on the other end began devoid of any warmth regarding the request for the Ascendies 7 mobility lift for your mother, Eleanor Reed. After a review by our panel, the device has been classified as a quality-of-life convenience, not a medical necessity under Policy 7B, subsection 12. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. A convenience. She can barely get out of bed. Her physical therapist said it was essential to prevent further muscle atrophy and reduce the risk of a fall. We understand, the woman said, though her tone suggested she understood nothing at all. However, it does not meet the criteria for essential medical equipment. You have the right to appeal, of course. The appeal process may take 90 to 120 business days to review. In the meantime, the out-of-pocket cost for the device and installation is $8,400. $8,400. The number seemed to suck all the air from the tiny room. It was an impossible sum, a mountain she could never hope to climb on tips and a meager student loan. The world narrowed to the cracked linoleum floor beneath her feet. The case manager was still talking about forms and deadlines, but her voice had become a meaningless buzz. Lyra hung up her hand, trembling. The weight on her shoulders, already immense, had just become unbearable. She felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying panic that made the small room feel like a cage. When she stepped back onto the restaurant floor, her face was a pale, tight mask. She moved through the motions of her job, but her mind was a whirlwind of impossible numbers and her mother's fading smile. She needed this job. She couldn't just survive here. She had to excel to earn every last dollar in tips to somehow make a dent in that mountain of debt. Her fear was no longer a vague anxiety. It was a sharp physical thing, a shard of ice lodged in her chest. Gerald, ever the predator, seemed to smell her desperation. He watched her with an intensified scrutiny, a cruel gleam in his eyes. He knew she was on the edge, and he seemed to be eagerly awaiting the moment she would fall. That moment arrived on a chaotic Saturday night. The Gilded Spoon was a frantic symphony of noise, clattering silverware, boisterous laughter, the incessant chime of the service bell. Lyra was stretched to her breaking point, juggling a demanding six-top, celebrating a birthday, a quiet couple on a tense first date, and a table of 4 tourists who wanted to split their check 4 ways, all with separate credit cards. Amidst the chaos, Arthur arrived. He navigated the crowded room with his usual quiet grace and settled into booth 4. As he caught her eye, Lyra felt a fresh jolt of anxiety. She couldn't afford a confrontation tonight. But as she glanced his way, she saw an unusual gravity in his expression. He seemed to sense her distress. After delivering a round of cocktails to the birthday party, she saw her chance. Gerald was deep in conversation with a food critic at the bar. She hurried to Arthur's booth, her notepad in hand. The usual Arthur, she whispered, her voice strained. He looked at her, his clear blue eyes searching her face with an unnerving intensity. "No, liar," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not tonight. Tonight things need to be brought into the light. A special occasion is required?" He tapped a finger on the menu. "Tonight I will have the Filt Minor Medium Rare and a glass of the Cabernet Sauvignon, the one from the Peton Reserve." Liar froze her pen, hovering over the paper. Her blood ran cold. The Filt was $95. The Pemberton Reserve, the most expensive single vintage they offered, was $40 a glass. Her mind reeled. Was this a test? Or had he finally lost his grip on reality? A flash of Jessica's sneering face filled her mind. "He's probably dining and dashing. You'll be the one footing that bill." The thought of losing over $100 from her own pocket tonight, when every single dollar was precious, was terrifying. She pictured the $8,000 bill for the lift. "Arthur, are you sure?" she stammered, her professionalism cracking. It's a very expensive meal." "I am quite sure," he replied, his gaze unwavering. There was a strange finality in his tone, a sense of purpose that unsettled her even more than the order itself. "Please, liar." Torn between the trust she had built with this man and the raw, screaming panic for her own survival, she made a choice. She took a deep breath, a silent leap of faith. Of course, Arthur right away. As she punched the exorbitant order into the point-of-sale system, she felt a presence behind her. It was Jessica, whose eyes widened in malicious glee as she saw the items on the screen. "Wow!" Jessica hissed, leaning in conspiratorially. His Grandpa Warbucks finally cashing in his pension. "You better get a credit card up front for that, sweetie, or you can kiss your rent money goodbye." ALA's jaw tightened, but she refused to give Jessica the satisfaction of her response. She ripped the ticket from the printer and walked it back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. S took the ticket and let out a low whistle. Filet for the old-timer. "He hit the lottery, I guess," so Liar said, weakly. S looked at her pale face, then back at the ticket, his expression hardening. "I'll make him the best damn steak he's ever had." He grunted, turning to the grill with a newfound intensity. The 10 minutes it took to cook the steak were the longest of Liar's life. When Sal finally placed the plate on the pass, a perfectly seared fillet, glistening in its own juices, nestled against a mound of creamy potatoes, it looked like a work of art. Liar carefully poured the deep red wine, her hands trembling slightly, and carried the tray to booth 4. The moment she set the plate and glass down in front of Arthur, she felt a cold shadow fall over her. Gerald was standing right behind her. His face was a thundercloud of triumphant rage. He had seen the order. The trap had been sprung. "Ms. Reed," he said, his voice a low, venomous growl. "A word. Now." He didn't wait for her. He strode to the empty host stand near the back entrance, a semi-private space, away from the main dining floor. He turned, his arms crossed, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. "So this is your little game." He seethed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You finally lost your mind, or you're just a complete and utter imbecile. You let that degenerate order a $135 meal he has no possible way of paying for. This is beautiful. It's perfect." He leaned in, savoring his victory. "When he fails to pay, and he will, I will have you terminated for gross negligence and willful destruction of company property. It's a clean firing, no arguments. Your ridiculous attachment to that trash has finally cost you everything." A tiny spark of defiance flickered within Isla's despair. Her voice shook, but it was firm. "He will pay for it." Gerald laughed a short, ugly bark. "Oh, I'm sure he will." "With what?" The lint in his pockets. "It's over, Miss Reed. Let's not prolong this. You're fired. Pack your personal effects and vacate the premises. Your final paycheck with the deduction for this meal will be mailed to you." Fired. The word landed with the force of a physical blow. The sounds of the restaurant, the chatter, the clinking glasses, faded into a distant roar. All she could hear was that single word, a death nail for her hopes. Her mother. The lift. Leo, it was all gone. Hot tears of humiliation and rage burned at the back of her eyes. "You can't," she whispered the words catching in her throat. "Please, Mr. Price, I can. And I have—" He sneered, clearly enjoying her distress. "You are a liability I can no longer afford. Now get out before you cause a scene, and I have security remove you." He turned his back on her, a gesture of ultimate dismissal, victorious and absolute. "I don't think so." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the sharp, clear authority of a commanding general. It sliced through Gerald's triumphant moment, and Lia's despair, making both of them freeze. They turned. Arthur was standing there, having risen from his booth. He had taken a few steps towards them, and the transformation was breathtaking. The gentle, elderly stoop was gone. He stood perfectly erect, his shoulders back, radiating an aura of absolute command that seemed to alter the very light around him. The shabby, unassuming air he had worn like a cloak had vanished. His clear blue eyes, no longer merely observant, now held a glacial power that was sharp enough to strip paint. Gerald scoffed, still blinded by his own arrogance. "Excuse me, this is a private staff matter. Go back to your table before I have you removed for trespassing." Arthur took another deliberate step forward. "You seem to be confused, Mr. Price," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that held a terrifying calm. "This entire restaurant is my table, as are the 17 other establishments in the Peaton Hospitality Group portfolio." He paused, letting the words sink in, each one a hammer blow against Gerald's smug certainty. "And as for trespassing," Arthur's gaze hardened into chips of ice. "I believe you are the one standing in my restaurant on my property, attempting to fire one of my best employees." Gerald's face went through a rapid, almost comical series of contortions, from contempt to confusion to dawning disbelief, and finally to stark, abject horror. His jaw worked, but no sound emerged. His face, moments ago flushed with power, was now the color of old parchment. Pip Pemberton. He finally stammered the name, a choked, strangled whisper. Arthur Peaton, the old man, confirmed his voice, now ringing with undisguised authority. "Founder and owner. And for the last 6 weeks I have been conducting a personal undercover audit of this location. An audit, I must say, you have failed in spectacular fashion." Arthur's gaze swept over Gerald, cold and dismissive. "I have seen you berate your staff for sport. I have seen you cultivate a culture of fear and intimidation. I have seen evidence of inventory fraud and skimming from the bar. And tonight I have seen you attempt to destroy the career of the only person on this floor who truly understands the meaning of the word hospitality." Just then, as if on cue, the main doors of the restaurant swung open. A woman in a sharp, impeccably tailored business suit strode in, flanked by 2 large, impassive men who radiated quiet competence. It was Olivia Harrington, the COO of Pemberton Hospitality, a legendary figure in the industry. She walked with purpose directly towards their group, her eyes like Arthur's missing nothing. She nodded crisply to Arthur. "Mr. Peaton." Her gaze then settled on the shell-shocked manager. "Mr. Price, our forensic accounting team has finished their preliminary report. The numbers are illuminating." Gerald Price looked from Arthur to Olivia Harrington and back again. He looked at the man he had called a degenerate, a cancer, a hobo, and saw not a shabby old man, but the architect of his complete and utter ruin, the Gilded Spoon. His petty kingdom had just been reclaimed by its true king, and he was nothing more than a fool about to be cast into the wilderness. Lia stood frozen between them, caught in the silent, swirling eye of the hurricane, watching as the world she knew was being torn down and rebuilt, moment by powerful moment, right before her very eyes. The aftermath of the revelation was not a sudden explosion, but a shockwave that radiated outward from their small group. The tables closest to the back entrance fell silent. First conversations dying mid-sentence as diners turned to stare. The silence spread a ripple, moving across the plush carpeting, extinguishing the room's cheerful hum, until the only sounds were the distant sizzle from S's kitchen and the frantic, terrified panting of Gerald Price. For Laya, the world had tilted on its axis. The cold dread of her recent firing was still a fresh wound, and this sudden violent reversal was too much to process. It was a form of emotional whiplash. She felt strangely detached, as if watching a pivotal scene in a film about someone else's life. Arthur Pemberton. The name echoed in her mind, finally clicking into place with a staggering resonance. The Pemberton Reserve Wine. The Peaton Hospitality Group. A name she'd seen on corporate letterhead in the office. It had all been there hiding in plain sight. She saw the folded napkin in her mind's eye, the canary. Courage, little bird. He wasn't just offering sympathy. He was the owner of the gilded cage, and he was watching to see if the bird would still sing. Olivia Harrington's voice, sharp as shattering glass, sliced through the stunned tableau. "Mr. Price," she announced, her tone devoid of any emotion save for a cold finality. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Our preliminary audit has uncovered significant financial discrepancies, including inventory fraud and payroll padding. The gentleman with me will escort you from the premises. You will be contacted by our legal department." The mention of legal action seemed to drain the last bit of fight from Gerald. He wasn't just losing his job. He was facing a future of depositions and potential prosecution. His face, once flushed with triumphant rage, was now a pasty, slack mask of absolute terror. He looked at Arthur, the man he had called a vagrant, and it was like watching a man stare into the face of his own personal god, a wrathful, disappointed god. One of the large men in suits placed a firm, unyielding hand on Gerald's elbow. As they guided him away, a broken man shuffling towards the exit. His eyes snagged on Laya's. For a fleeting instant, she saw no anger, only a pathetic, desperate appeal. It was the look of a man drowning, begging for a lifeline from the very person he'd just tried to push under. A cold, distant pity was all she could feel in return. Ms. Harrington's laser-like focus then shifted to Jessica, who had been frozen near the service station, her earlier glee having curdled into pure, unadulterated panic. Miss Davies, the COO, said, and Jessica flinched as if struck. "Your behaviour towards your colleagues, which has also been observed and thoroughly documented, is antithetical to the values of this company. Your employment is also terminated. You have 5 minutes to collect your personal belongings from your locker." Jessica's face crumpled. The carefully constructed facade of a cool, untouchable mean girl dissolved into that of a scared, petulant child. But he told me to... She stammered, a trembling finger, pointing at Gerald's retreating back. He encouraged it. It was his policy. "Leadership starts at the top," Harrington replied, her voice unmoved. "But accountability is for everyone. You made your own choices. 5 minutes. With a choked sob, Jessica turned and fled toward the locker room, her high heels clicking a frantic, humiliating retreat across the floor. The other staff members watched her go, not with triumph, but with a kind of sober shock. The twin tyrants of their nightly existence had been vanquished in less time than it took to decant a bottle of wine. The entire restaurant staff stood like statues caught in the eerie quiet. They were adrift, their chain of command not just broken, but vaporized. Arthur Peaton took a step forward, and the collective gaze of every employee and patron in the room snapped to him. He first looked at Laya, giving her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent gesture of reassurance of trust. Then he addressed the entire room, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight that reached every corner. "My sincere apologies for this disruption to your evening," he said to the diners. Then, turning slightly, he spoke to the staff. "For the remainder of the night, your new chain of command is simple. Sal Moretti is in charge of the kitchen." From the kitchen doorway, Sal, who had been watching with a stunned, grimly satisfied expression, simply wiped his hands on his apron and nodded once. He'd known for months that something was rotten, and now the rot was being excised. And Laya Reed Arthur continued, his eyes finding hers again, is in charge of the floor. The words hit Laya with the force of a physical blow. A jolt of pure panic shot through her, erasing the last vestiges of her dazed shock. "Me." The word escaped her lips as a breathless squeak. In charge, Mr. Peaton. I can't. I don't know how. She looked around at the faces of her co-workers, Kevin, Ben, Maria, who were all staring at her, as if she'd grown a second head. Arthur's expression softened. He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only she and a few others could hear. Ella, you know how to treat people with dignity. You know how to listen. You know how to care. The rest is just logistics. For tonight, that is all that matters. Ms. Harrington and I will be in the office if you need any assistance. He then raised his voice again, projecting to the room. Now please do your best to ensure our guests have a pleasant experience. Finally, in a master stroke of both apology and celebration, he announced, and as a thank you for your patience during our management restructuring, all meals tonight are on the house. A wave of astonished murmurs, then excited chatter swept through the dining room. The tension shattered. They were no longer just diners. They were witnesses, participants in a story they would be telling for the rest of their lives. The rest of the night passed in a surreal, adrenaline-fueled haze for Laya. She was operating on instinct, her mind still reeling. She took a deep, shaky breath and walked directly to the kitchen to the only other person Arthur had deputized. S looked at her, his usual scowl replaced by bewilderment. Kid, what the hell just happened? I have no idea, S. She confessed, her voice trembling slightly. But he put us in charge, so let's be in charge. Just cook. Cook the best food you've ever cooked. No shortcuts, no rushing. A slow grin spread across S's face. For the first time, he looked truly happy to be at his station. You got it, boss, he said, the word boss feeling both strange and perfectly right. Her first act as floor manager was to gather the terrified waitstaff. Okay, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. We're going to get through this. Just focus on your tables. Be honest with them. Tell them we're working through some changes. Thank them for their patience and make sure their water glasses are always full. No one gets a check tonight. Just focus on service. We'll work as a team. Any problems, you come to me? Kevin, who had once played games to avoid Arthur, now nodded eagerly. Ben, the nervous waiter, looked visibly relieved to have clear, kind instructions. The oppressive cloud of fear they all worked under had lifted, and in its place was a fragile, tentative sense of collaboration. Laya moved through the dining room, her stride becoming more confident with each step. She checked on tables, not as a server hunting for a tip, but as a host, a guardian of the space. The sounds of the restaurant seemed to change. The clatter of silverware felt less frantic. The conversations more relaxed. The smiles on the faces of her colleagues were no longer strained and artificial. They were genuine. They were working for something more than a paycheck now. They were working for each other. When the last guest had finally departed, gushing about the incredible meal and the even more incredible show, Laya felt a bone-deep exhaustion settle over her. She did a final walk-through of the silent, empty dining room and headed to the office. The door was ajar. She knocked softly. Mr. Peaton, come in. Come in, Laya. His voice called out. She entered the room that had only a few hours ago been her personal chamber of horrors. Arthur and Miss Harrington were sitting at the desk, reviewing a thick binder that Laya recognized as Gerald's operations log. He gestured for her to take the chair opposite him, the very chair she had sat in while being threatened and fired. Sitting down now felt like an act of defiance. You handled that beautifully. Arthur said, his eyes warm with approval. You're a natural leader. I just tried to keep everyone from panicking. She admitted, her hands clasped in her lap. And that right there is the essence of management, he replied with a smile. I feel I owe you a more complete explanation. My coming here, as I said, was to investigate. We were getting reports from vendors about pressure for kickbacks, anonymous emails from former staff about a toxic environment. Profits were down, but Gerald's expense reports were higher than ever. I don't build my businesses from an ivory tower, Laya. Sometimes you have to go to the ground and check the foundation for cracks. He sighed, a deep weariness in his expression. I came here expecting to find greed. I did not expect to find you. You were the unforeseen variable. In a place rife with cynicism, you chose compassion. Every single day you treated a shabby old man who could seemingly offer you nothing, with the grace and respect you would offer a head of state. You didn't do it for a reward. You did it because that is the person you are. Laya felt a blush creep up her neck. I almost stopped. She confessed the memory of her fear still sharp. He threatened my job. I was terrified. And yet, you came back, Arthur said softly. That is what real courage is, Laya. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. He paused, a twinkle in his eye. That's why I drew the canary. A small, fragile thing trapped in a cage, but it still finds a reason to sing. He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from reflective to purposeful. This brings us to the matter of your future and your family. Ms. Harrington is very efficient. Olivia Harrington slid a crisp, official-looking letter across the desk. It was from the Pempton Foundation. I took the liberty of contacting your mother's physician. Ms. Harrington said her business-like tone now softened with a hint of kindness. The foundation will be covering all of Elena Reed's current and future medical expenses related to her condition. The mobility lift you were concerned about has been ordered and will be installed by the end of this week. Furthermore, she tapped a paragraph in the letter. The foundation is pleased to offer you a full academic scholarship to complete your nursing degree, covering all tuition books and associated costs. Laya picked up the letter. Her hands trembled as she read the words. But they were real. It was all real. The crushing, suffocating weight that had been pressing down on her for years, the constant gnawing anxiety about bills and medicine, and her mother's comfort in an instant, it was gone. A wave of relief so profound it felt like a physical force washed over her, and she finally let the tears she had been holding back fall freely. They weren't tears of fear or humiliation, but of overwhelming gratitude. Thank you, she whispered the words inadequate. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, Arthur said, gently, giving her a moment to compose herself. When she finally looked up, he continued, That scholarship is yours with no strings attached. You can walk out of here tonight and dedicate yourself fully to becoming the wonderful nurse I know you will be. However, he paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. I have another proposition. I would like to formally offer you the position of general manager of the Gilded Spoon permanently. Laya's jaw dropped. Mr. Peanutton, I'm a waitress. I have no experience in management. I don't know anything about inventory or payroll, or you have the only experience that matters. He interjected firmly but kindly. You have emotional intelligence. You have integrity. You have the unteachable ability to make people feel seen and valued. That is the true foundation of hospitality. Ms. Harrington can teach you how to read a balance sheet. I can teach you our business model. But we cannot teach what you already possess in your heart. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, silent dining room. I am not asking you to abandon your dream. In fact, I think the two are connected. A nurse heals the body. A great restorator can help heal the spirit. You have the chance to make this place a sanctuary, a place where the staff feels respected and the guests feel genuinely welcomed, a place that reflects your own character. He turned back to her, his blue eyes filled with a sincere belief in her that was more powerful than any job offer. The choice is yours, Laya. A scholarship, your path to nursing completely clear. Or a career, a chance to build something extraordinary right here. Or a small, knowing smile touched his lips. If you're as ambitious as I think you are, you could choose both. Laya looked from his earnest face to the letter that represented her family's salvation. She thought of her nursing textbooks and the passion she had for them. Then she looked through the office doorway into the restaurant she had for one chaotic, brilliant night led. She pictured S's grin, Ben's relief, and the feeling of a team pulling together. She realized Arthur was right. Nursing and this, they weren't different paths. They were just two different expressions of the same core impulse to care for people. A slow smile, The first truly joyful and unburdened one she'd had in years spread across her face. It was a smile of dawning self-awareness, of stepping into a power she never knew she had. "I'll do it," she said, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound certainty. "I'll do both." Arthur Peaton's answering smile was bright enough to light up the entire room. The gilded spoon had not just been saved from corruption. It had been given a new soul. Liar's story is a powerful reminder that our true worth isn't measured by our job title, our bank account, or the clothes we wear. It's measured by the compassion we show when we think no one of importance is watching. It's about recognizing the profound humanity in every single person, regardless of their appearance or station in life. The world can often feel cold and transactional, a place that rewards cynicism and punishes vulnerability. But as Laya discovered a single act of genuine kindness. A decision to choose empathy over apathy can create ripples of change you never could have expected transforming. Not only the life of another, but your own destiny as well. If this story moved you and reminded you of the power of everyday decency, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need this message of hope today. And for more real-life stories about hidden heroes and the unexpected twists that shape our lives, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications. Thank you for watching, and remember to look for the good in the world, and more importantly, to be the good in the